Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Scott Hinesley. I'm the current president of IBEC, and I want to welcome you to the final afternoon of the virtual convention and trade show, or as Bob Card called it on Friday, the Unconvention. I hope you've all enjoyed the sessions, and I hope you've all been able to visit the booths in the exhibit hall. Just a reminder that all of the content, including the trade show, is available to you until July the 15th. And for those of you who missed the opening session on Friday, it's now available in the auditorium. I also want to give a plug to the foundation in case you haven't already seen it. There's several items up for auction. You have until 7:30 Central Time this evening to bid on those. And you can find the link to the auction on pretty much any page on the convention software. It's blinking in the bottom of the page. So, wow, our first ever virtual convention. And, you know, I've got to say that given what we're accustomed to, meeting face to face, it was disappointing, of course, that we weren't able to do that. But I have got to tell you that I would consider this a success. Brian and his team did an amazing job pulling this together on the fly. There were some things that were new to us. There's a lot of takeaways. We've gotten a lot of feedback for things that people would like to see differently. And I would really encourage you to provide your additional feedback as to improvements in case we have to use pieces of this virtual convention going forward. Personally, I've decided that I'd like to see some form of a spell check in the virtual chat part, because I'm sure that most people that I've interacted with think that I can't spell. So for that, I apologize. But Brian, your team, you guys have done an amazing job. You've turned lemon into lemonade, and we're going to build on this, and hopefully we'll be able to meet face to face at our convention next year. So let's move on to why we're all here. So I'm excited about this panel session. You know, we've had a lot of conversations about coronavirus and COVID, and sometimes you might get tired of hearing it, but I think we've got a good opportunity to hear from other leaders of the industry to learn their thoughts about how COVID will affect the construction industry, the design and construction industry going forward. We'll talk about some of the short-term issues. We'll talk about you know, what sort of long-term effects we may see arise from this. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our three panelists today. We've got Reed Hitchcock, the Executive Vice President of the Asphalt Roofing Manufacturers Association. We have Reed Ribble, the CEO of the National Roofing Contractors Association, and Lakeisha Woods, the President and CEO of the National Institute of Building Sciences. So what I'd like to do is give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, introduce their associations, and then after that, we'll kick off with some questions and discussions. And I'll start with you, Reed Hitchcock.
Great, thank you, Scott. And, thank you to IBEC and Brian for letting me participate in this panel with Reed Ribble and Lakeisha Woods. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion, and we get some great organizations represented here. For those that don't know, ARMA is the Asphalt Roofing Manufacturers Association. We represent the manufacturers of asphalt shingles, modified bitumen, and built-up roofing systems, as well as the suppliers to the industry and service providers to the industry. ARMA's been around since 1915, so this marks our 105th year as an organization. Asphalt's been around a little bit longer, but we've got a great history in the industry and as an organization, and we really spend our area in four key activities. It's advocacy, information, education, and communication. Obviously, there's a lot of different aspects to that. We have technical literature, we have building code advocacy. We also spend a lot of work on plant health and safety and environmental issues. So obviously COVID has been a challenge for our industry, just as it has been for everybody else's. And I think we've got a lot to talk about and a lot to be proud of as the whole roofing industry and the whole building industry. And so I won't belabor the point. I think we've got some great questions that we'll be talking about, and look forward to sharing with y'all. Back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Reed. I appreciate that. And now we'll give the other Reed on our discussion panel an opportunity to introduce himself. Reed Ribble, it's all yours.
Hey, thank you, Scott, and welcome everybody this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you, even though we're doing this virtually, which I think we've all pretty much gotten used to. My name is Reed Ribble. I'm the CEO of the National Roofing Contractors Association. Many of you know us as NRCA, and we represent predominantly roofing contractors. However, we've got membership categories for architects, engineers, and consultants, roofing manufacturers, roof distribution, and virtually any stakeholder in the roofing industry. And the one thing I wanted to drive home to everybody this afternoon is the idea that although COVID has been a tragedy for the country, it hasn't necessarily been a tragedy for the roofing industry writ large. And also there have been some really interesting developments that have come as a result of it. From the very beginning of this, the communication of the roofing industry writ large has gotten exponentially louder. I have weekly and sometimes or bi-monthly meetings with my counterparts in virtually every roofing industry related association, including IBEC, ARMA, SPRI, PEMA, the Tile Roof Institute, National Slate Association, the Spray Foam folks, the EPDM, ERA, virtually anybody, Cedar Shake and Shingle Bureau. And we've been meeting regularly to share best practices of how to best engage the roofing industry. And at the very beginning, literally within a day or so of the national shutdown, the entire industry had signed on to a letter to ask the President of the United States to include roofing as an essential service. And we were successful around the country for the most part in getting that done. And that was a result of the whole industry coming together and speaking in one voice and accomplishing some pretty good things during the course of this time. That's now expanded to, I'm having calls every other week on an international basis with my counterparts around the world. And there are times that we have got folks from New Zealand and Germany and Poland and Scotland, Canada, virtually all around the world talking to us, sharing what's going on in their part of the world as it relates to COVID and the best practices that we can put in place. And so, Scott, I'm looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. And hopefully we can bring some additional insight as to what the state of the roofing industry is today and what it might look like going forward. And with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Reed. I appreciate those words. And lastly, I'll turn it over to Lakeisha to introduce herself. Lakeisha?
Hello. Well, as Scott mentioned, my name is Lakeisha Woods. I'm the president and CEO of the National Institute of Building Sciences. We were established in 1974 by Congress to ensure that all areas of the built environment work together to utilize the best technology and sustainability when creating the places where we live, work, learn, and play. Our 501c3 charitable organization focuses on bringing the various segments of the built environment together to discuss common challenges and how to find solutions. Developing research and convening experts to solve problems is a part of our overall mission, and that's why I'm here today. Our membership is a cross-section of the industry, including experts from universities, local, state, and federal agencies, transportation authorities, builders, architects, engineers, code officials, so many more. They are the thinkers, makers, and stakeholders with boots on the ground across the country that work to move our industry forward. Navigating the construction industry in these uncertain times, it's going to take vision, expertise, and partnership. I'm happy to be here to work with the great partners like the leadership here at IBEC to build a blueprint of possibility. For some background, I have spent my career representing the construction space, starting my career at the National Ready Mix Concrete Association. And from there, I moved to the Associated General Contractors of America, and then to the National Association of Home Builders, where I served as their chief marketing officer. Moving here to NIBS just seemed like a natural next step to bring all the various organizations that I previously worked with and so many more together. I have a great deal of passion and respect for the building industry, and I'm just honored to be here with you today. Scott, I'll turn it to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So now, if our READ panelists want to come back, we'll all get together and dive into this thing. I do want to mention to those of you watching from home, over on the right-hand side, I guess there is an option for you to ask a question. And if you have questions that you would like to ask, go ahead and ask them. We've reserved some time for the end of this discussion to address your questions. Hopefully, depending on how much time we have left when we're finished, hopefully we can get to all of them. But if we aren't able to get to all of them, we will collect all of the questions and respond to you individually if you provide your name with your question. So, tell you what, we're gonna jump right in here, and I think I want to ask all of you the same question, because I think you may be, based on your membership, you may be facing this a little bit differently. But Lakeisha, I'll start with you. What would you say has been your top concern or issue that your members are facing or have faced during the past few months?
Well, the interesting perspective in representing that sort of cross-section of all the various silos is we are trying to make sure that the different groups are talking to each other when they're talking about where we're running into challenges. So what NIBS has done is we've put together a series of town halls, specifically as it relates to COVID-19, but also on other various topics that relate to workforce, one of the big challenges facing our industry. Our town halls for COVID-19, we try to bring together the various categories of groups that need to be talking to each other in order for us to open buildings and prepare for those next steps as we move forward. It has been very well received. Our first town hall had about 1,800 people. So people are interested in knowing not just when they can go back to work, but also how are they going to get there safely? What's happening from a transportation perspective? And then also the mental health and what people are dealing with challenge-wise, and how to just have those honest conversations and talk about solutions. So we have engaged, I think we've increased our engagement with our members because of the current environment, and we want to continue to do that and help all of our various organizations as we move forward.
Thank you. And Reed Hitchcock, I'll pose that exact same question to you to see if there's a different perspective. But what are the top issues that your members that you are hearing are facing?
Well, I think there's been a flow to it, right? I mean, when the crisis first started, our challenge was to understand the implications of the various stay-at-home and shutdown orders that were coming out by state, local jurisdiction, and even the federal guidance that was coming out to understand, was roofing, our industry, considered an essential industry, both from the manufacturing perspective and the installation perspective. And I don't want to step on Mr. Ribble. I'm sure he'll touch on some of this as well, because we do have some overlap there. So, you know, is your factory shut down? Is your market shut down? And then as the crisis started to mature, you're dealing with issues like plant sanitation, and that's where, similar to Lakeisha's organization, we hosted a few town halls for our members to get together and exchange information about best practices in plant health and safety and environmental issues, keeping workers safe, keeping plants clean, what to do in the event of infection, an employee situation. They did happen. No sugarcoating it. It's a real health crisis, and those things did happen. So making sure that we were able to be a conduit for information for our members. And then more recently, it's been understanding the reopening situation and the variance. Again, you've got guidance that varies across the country by jurisdictions and localities. And again, communicating some of those good practices among our members and letting them exchange the ideas. What are you doing in terms of staggering shifts? What are you doing in terms of remote training? What are you doing in terms of taking temperature scans of roofers or of workers at the beginning of the day? So it's been this evolving thing, and our mission and our job has been to facilitate that information and communication activity.
Perfect. Thank you, Reed. Ribble, what are your thoughts on that?
Not a lot different than what you just heard. I mean, there's been a flow of this and an evolution of it. Remember, this goes back to really about mid-March when everything kind of came to a screeching halt in the country. And so initially, the primary concern is, can we work, and how do we do that? Then as we got our arms around that, we understood, it turned out to be, what type of work am I in? Residential was harmed more than commercial and institutional. Commercial roofing was harmed more than institutional roofing. And also where my locale was. If you were in Michigan, where roofing was deemed non-essential, or Pennsylvania, that became a crisis. And so for us, it was all about providing very current information. And then as the crisis emerged and Congress began to respond with the CARES Act and other legislation, it was informing our members on how they could tap into that, the legislation, and how Congress and the president was responding, and would it be helpful for them? What did PPP loans actually mean? What type of tax credits were actually there, and how could they utilize them? And then after that wave of legislation went through, then the rules began to come out of it from the Treasury. We had to explain to them, well, here's the information you must track to make sure that parts of this loan are forgivable based on what Congress' intent was. And it was a challenge all along the way to make sure that our members had the most current, up-to-date information in real time. And so we were updating our website sometimes in the middle of the night. So when the industry woke up the next day, they had the current information right at their fingertips. And now today, it's how do we re-engage safely, and how do we get my employees back, in some cases off of unemployment? How are we going to get them re-engaged in the economy again and get restarted? And there is a great deal of concern from my members about what the U.S. economy is going to look like in the end of, let's say, the fourth quarter of 2020 and going into the first quarter of 2021. With 30 million Americans unemployed, that will have an impact on customer demand at every sector of the roofing industry, except possibly institutional. So that's kind of where things are right now, Scott.
So, Lakeisha, I want to dig into something that you said, because I think it's extremely important, and maybe we don't talk about it enough. And it sort of meshes well with Reed's comment about the unemployment numbers. But in your response, you specifically mentioned mental health. And I would love to get your take on what steps industries could be taking to help ensure that they're doing everything that they can to provide resources, or whatever their role needs to be in that realm. But I think it's something that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, and especially in this time, it's a very important topic. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those things that people take for granted. They may not necessarily think about the mental health aspects, especially within the construction space. We are hoorah, we can do anything we need to do. However, there are so many different areas that you need to be aware of. And the first thing is we did a town hall that tied back to the mental health, about people going back, not just going back to work, but going back into spaces that had been used for COVID patients or medical workers. So hotels, convention centers, think of the convention that your organizations have, the hotels that have been housing those people, and how people feel about traveling to those spaces. It affects everybody. And what was interesting is we had a gentleman by the name of Dr. Evans, who's the CEO for the American Psychological Association, and he gave really great, clear tips to, expressing the importance of certainty, giving people very clear direction, keeping the lines of communication open. I would recommend anybody, if you want to take a look at some of the summary of what he said, it's available on our website, nibs.org, and you can just click on or search for COVID-19 Town Hall, and you'll see those details. But we had questions that were coming in from federal agency contacts and people from around the world, and all their questions tied back to the mental health aspects, the anxiety they have about getting on public transportation. It's not necessarily that they don't want to go back to work, but it was just getting to work, where so many people they don't drive in, and how are we as a building industry preparing for an influx of vehicles on the road, and just all those different elements. So I do think it's really important for companies to get additional research from actual doctors, because I am not one, to address mental health. But you have to think about it, because that is a big area that will really impact the bottom line. If people don't think you care about them, they don't want to work for you.
So get the information from doctors and not from Facebook. I think we heard that on Friday.
Boom. Exactly.
Reed Ribble, knowing that your organization represents a lot of individuals, and I'm sure that mental health has probably been a big discussion amongst you and your team. And I'm curious what sort of approach you all are taking in regards to that.
Scott, it's a great question. I'm so glad that you brought up this topic. Male suicide in the construction industry is a real problem, and it gets exacerbated by moments like this where people feel more isolated, they feel more fear, there's more anxiety, and you can even sense it in some of the meetings that we're in, because you can hear it. You can hear the shortness of tempers, the more direct people get, the more confrontational they get. They feel like they were locked down in their homes, and they're put in an environment that they were unaccustomed to. And then you add to that the anxiety and fear of what the financial losses may be in their companies and the risk that was there. And so, like Lakeisha, we've spent an inordinate amount of time providing up-to-date information on our website at nrca.net. There's a link right at the top for our COVID information, and our risk management department has provided a lot of information in regard to not just sanitation and how to avoid the risk of COVID, but also in some of these areas centered around mental health. And so it's a concern that we all are carrying, but we're glad to see that the economy is starting to reopen and people are able to be outside and getting in some fresh air, and to the degree, and I don't mean this to be facetious at all, getting some separation from spouses and kids, and trying to get a little bit back to normal, where the space that you were so accustomed to having and that time that you were so accustomed to having gets to be normal again. And but it's been a concern, and we've heard it.
Well, it's certainly important. Reed Hitchcock, have you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Representing manufacturers, my organization isn't as hands-on the individual issues, but certainly our member companies are, and you've got the folks working in offices and in R&D and marketing and sales and those things, and you've got plant workers that are all part of who we represent. And a lot of the feedback I've had from our member companies is just ensuring frequent interaction, tools like this. I mean, it's the Zoom meetings, and even the Zoom social events among various work teams and things of that nature. They're also utilizing the opportunity. People are at home, people that are otherwise hands-on machinery and warehousing and all these things. The manufacturers are taking the opportunity to do interactive training, refresher courses, introducing new workflows and things like that, and making sure that those people remain engaged. And then it's the frequent communication about what the various companies are doing to ensure their safety when they do return. And making sure that all that is spelled out very clearly, and try to provide that to the extent that anybody can, that understanding that the companies do have their best interest at heart when it comes to their health and safety.
I got to say this, yesterday while I was going through our virtual exhibit hall, we were having a lot of interactive chats with our vendors, and it was a lot of lighthearted comments, and it was fun chatting with everyone. But again, I can only type so fast, and it just seemed like it was speed social networking. It worked well. We made some great contacts. But I went to one particular manufacturer's site that had a click here to talk with the owner live button. And I thought, well, heck, I'll click that button. And sure enough, it took me right into his living room. He was standing there and we had a Zoom conversation. And just that feeling of having gone from, okay, I'm typing to having this sort of interaction, it really did, to me especially, it was a very powerful moment, I thought, because it did give me that chance to have adult face-to-face interaction. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. But so this was actually going to be a question that I wanted to ask somewhere later down the line, but we're leading into this. And what are the short and long-term ramifications of this lack of us being able to get together face-to-face? How are we I think we all kind of know how we're impacted immediately just by my anecdotal story about yesterday. But I'm curious about, how long-term, what are the long-term effects, and how long does anybody think that anything like this is going to continue? Reed Ribble, I'll throw that over to you for your comments on it.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think it's an important topic to discuss because we've been living in the virtual world. It's simple to think that this contact is equal to or the same as a face-to-face meeting. And my concern for our members in this regard, and for IBEC members, quite frankly, is the same, and that is that the industry itself becomes more commoditized by it. That we end up living in this virtual space because of its efficiency, but we lose the actual benefit of relationship building that is so essential to our companies. And so a lot of companies are willing to pay a premium for a different type of service based on the human side of the business, the relational side of the business. And I think we have to be very careful about becoming so comfortable in the virtual space that we lose sight of those human relationships that help become a differentiator between one company and another. Otherwise, everybody is the same. And if everybody is the same, then the only thing that matters to the consumer is the price. And if it's just the price, that makes it bad for virtually everybody. And so, because in the world as a designer and Reed Hitchcock as a manufacturer, that although the products might be the same, each of those companies bring to the table different benefits that sometimes can only be understood and communicated in a different way. And at the end of the day, consumers buy from people. They don't really buy from organizations. And so we have to be so cautious about getting consumed in the virtual space that we never return to the human space that is so essential. And when you think in terms of mental illness, one of the best ways to combat mental illness is to have those human relationships where people are actually meeting with one another, talking with one another. And in my last column in Professional Roofing Magazine, I wrote about this. I'm fearful that people are going to be less willing for a handshake, less willing to give a hug to someone that's grieving, less willing to have those human connections that are so important in business relationships. And so that's my big caution in this regard.
Your members' makeup, like you mentioned, is a little different, and so I'd be curious. The factory workers, the manufacturers, they may be affected a little bit differently because I'd be curious as your thoughts on that, your input in that regard.
In the plants, in the roofing industry, jobs are pretty well spaced out most of the time anyway. Social distancing and those things are not hard to implement. There's obviously a lot of changes when it comes to the disinfecting of surfaces and things, and those are understandable. I think it's interesting listening to Reed, and I agree with a lot of what he said, because obviously again, our organizations, it's a trickle down, right? You've got sales and marketing, you've got plant workers, you've got these things. We're affected in many of the same ways. I talked with one of our member CEOs just a couple days ago, and I was talking to him about this actually in preparation for this discussion, and I was actually really surprised what he told me. All the manufacturers, you probably see it on LinkedIn or other places, they have these tools now, these digital tools. They can put a drone over your house and measure your roof. and all these things, and they can do a meeting with a customer virtually. And the manufacturers are providing all these tools, and they've got manufacturer logos all over them. They're fantastic. Interestingly, a lot of the homeowners, the building owners, they still want an individual to come to their house, even at this time, and talk to them. Maintain that distance, but also they want to interact directly with individuals. And so, in terms of what's going to change, I think, in that circumstance, the change is going to be that, you're going to stand a little bit further apart, but in a lot of ways, we're going to try and figure out how to make those things work as close to the way they did before, because that's what the consumer is really looking for. What I see changing, Reed alluded to this in his opening comments, the industry, the roofing industry, the building sciences industry, a lot of related organizations have come together in terms of interaction in an unprecedented way. I've worked with ARMA for 16 years this year, and I've never seen the industry come together like we have to message out about the importance of what we do. And I think that a lot of what started in this crisis will stay around. I've already seen some additional initiatives not related to COVID-19 that have started up. So I'm thrilled at that change. But in the manufacturing facilities, I think as things settle down, it's going to be more just about being more aware of the work environment, being more aware of the distances, being more aware of the cleanliness of the facilities, where you're putting your drivers when they come into a building, making sure that you're not needlessly creating a potential health risk.
So you had the, I'm sorry, Lakeisha, did you want to make a comment on that?
Sure. Actually, the one thing I think it's really important for our industry to think of as they navigate where we are, the increased use of all these virtual tools, and how we move forward is it's really important that we all look and re-examine our business profile. There are certain jobs and certain areas of your business that have to be in the field and on the job site, and you have to make adjustments accordingly. But this is also an opportunity for companies to reassess where their employees work, what is really critical versus what you've just always done because you've always done it that way. If you have roles like customer service and marketing within your own teams, that you can now allow them the flexibility to telework and continue to service your industry well and service your company well. Companies need to be prepared for that, because what has happened with all of the country trapped inside their homes, for those people who were able to maintain their jobs, they've found the pluses and minuses to both of those elements. And so I do think it's important for us to recognize, instead of saying, okay, what time and what's the date when we can just go back to the way things were, what have you learned from this experience? How do you move it forward? How do you change your interactions with your customers? I had mentioned when I was speaking with a gentleman earlier this week that I am, not only working in the industry, but I also am a customer. And I have a project that I'm doing at my home. And I went to get my 3 quotes, and I had 2 different vendors. One came out on site and walked through the space and talked about what was going to be done, and we had that interaction. And then the other person came out when I wasn't here, took photos, and then we did a virtual meeting. Well, I got to tell you, as much as I do love to interact with people in person, the person who I met with virtually was able to show me far more examples of what they've done in the past, the type of work that they do, how well they prepare a site, etc. The person who I met with virtually was more impressive than the person I met in person. So you also have to recognize who's your customer. What's the age range of the person you're trying to reach? What tools and communication profiles are they more comfortable with? There are all those elements that companies have to take in fold, because if you just want to meet somebody in person because you think that's the way your customers always want to meet, you're wrong. Depends on who your customer is. So it's just important to use these tools, use this opportunity as a learning experience, so we can all advance as an industry.
Scott, Lakeisha reminds me of a very important point, and I appreciate that. And that is, one of the other big changes that I've heard from my members is the acceptance, if you will, really because they had no choice, but of the online and virtual training. And it's not just for the factory workers, but it's also for the contractors. So a manufacturer who would normally bring some people together in a room for a training session, they're doing those things virtually. And feedback I got on from one company was that they've done a whole series of these, and a session that normally would have attracted about 70 people from a single company, and as a large company, attracted more than 1,000 people who gave it rave reviews. And so we are rethinking how we communicate with various audiences and taking advantage of these tools where we can to maximize our ability to do the work. And I think we'll continue to see a lot of changes in those types of things, because it's just, now we've seen we can do it. And we've proven that point. And so now let's look at the best ways to maximize our efficiencies and take advantage of that while people stay comfortable.
Well, let me a few minutes to continue that thought. What would you say would be the one piece of software or technology that you would have struggled the most with had you not had access to that during this the last several months? Do we all agree it's video conferencing, or is it?
I think so.
How about this? Is there any piece of technology or software or something outside of video conferencing that you have found to be a tremendous benefit to you that you wouldn't have realized it prior to the COVID crisis?
For me, I will say that it is, and of course we run an office, is our technology for our telephone system. We were already in the process of creating this tool for the staff people who telework, a couple days a week, and we wanted the process to be seamless so that if a member calls our 800 number, they get to access and reach out to those staff members no matter where they're located. But because we had that tool in place, when somebody calls our 800 number, even though our receptionist is working from her house right now, you still get her, and then she still patches you through to us through an app on our phone. And if our staff need to reach out to a member, instead of calling from their cell phone and all the membership having their personal cell phone number, they're calling from our office number through the app. And I think that allows people to still have that separation of business and personal, but it still gives that seamless transition to the people that you represent. When they reach you, when they call during business hours, they're going to get connected to you no matter where you are. They don't know if you're sitting in an office or sitting in your home office. So that's why I said to our members, we never closed our office. All we did was continue the business that we do where our staff are more comfortable and safe.
Reed Ribble, either NRCA or its members, have you heard anything about any technologies or anything that's been somewhat of a lifesaver for?
Well, I mean, from the roofing contracting side of things, they were already using a lot of technology. The use of drones and to do virtual estimating has been pretty common for the last several years. And so I wouldn't say that, but like Lakeisha talked about, our members, they really don't know where we're working from. We do have an actual living, breathing person that answers the phones, but she's answering the phones from her home. And then she connects us just like we were sitting in our office. And so I was very adamant that the membership and those that needed to reach out to us would have a seamless experience. And I have a tendency to think that we always think in terms of it just being via computer, and there are computers behind everything we do. But old technology like cell phones and telephones had to be integrated with that technology in a different way. And so from day one, it was a very seamless experience. And everything that we tried to do was focus back. What is the user feeling like, and what is their actual experience when they're interfacing with us, whether it's at an app, whether it's online at our website, whether it's through Zoom, Microsoft Teams, through GoToMeeting like this one. We wanted to make sure that everyone on our staff who was interfacing with our members could do that in the most seamless way possible. And by doing that, you're able to maintain a level of authenticity about who you are, and a level of connectedness that, if we were just sending emails and text messages, seemed to disappear.
So what's something that maybe we've started doing? And I guess I should preface all of these questions that we don't talk about video conferencing, because that could easily be the answer to every question I ask going forward. But what process or what practice do any of you identify that we're doing now that we weren't doing before, and we ask ourselves, why weren't we doing this before? You know, why was this not a normal practice for us prior to this pandemic? Reed, Ribble?
Yeah, you know, the thing that jumped out at me right away was how efficient you could have committee meetings, because NRCA's committees drive everything we do. And the efficiency of our committees have gone up exponentially, because nobody's getting on a plane and having to fly to Rosemont or Washington, D.C., where we have physical offices. We were able to have these meetings, and we've actually seen an increase in participation from our volunteers by using different forms of technology. The interesting thing is this technology existed before COVID-19. We just didn't necessarily believe it would work in the way it has worked. And so I think we're going to see a more efficient and leaner method of communication going forward. And I'll let the other ones speak on it as well.
Reed, how about you?
You know, we experience something similar. We meet a few times a year, and obviously, like everybody else, we had to cancel or postpone meetings. And before this, I wouldn't have expected a board meeting, and our board is comprised of owners and CEOs of major roofing companies. I wouldn't have expected the turnout and positive response for that we got. I got better engagement, frankly, because folks, A, were prohibited from traveling, and B, instead of 2 or 3 days on the road, it was, 3 hours in a meeting, and they were a lot. It was a lot easier for them to allow that time. So a good interaction, and something that's going to be interesting going forward. We always like to say that there is a value to those personal interactions and to maintaining the ability to go have a meal with somebody and things like that. But I think we're going to see in our organization, both at the committee level and the board level, a shift to more of those types of meetings. I don't think we'll go all the way the other direction, but I could see us splitting what used to be our meeting calendar to part, half virtual, half face-to-face going forward, and maybe even something else down the road. We still have to make sure that we're providing those networking opportunities that are part of what we offer our membership, and we don't want to lose that. I am going to touch on video conferencing, though. Unlike Reed and Lakeisha, I already worked from home. So for me, my personal environment didn't change. What I did find, however, our staff, a lot of our staff already works in one place, but we do have several remote people. I've seen more of my team in the last 3 months than I've seen in the last 2.5 years. And that's been great. And I want to continue that. I don't want to lose what's become a regular occurrence of regular team meetings that we've established once you've got a core group of administrative staff back in the office. And for our members, I saw a great example of this, and maybe all of your companies are using it. I've got a bookshelf behind me. I feel like that's a fairly professional environment. Some people don't have that, and the use of these virtual backgrounds is fantastic. I've seen people whose virtual background looks like they're sitting in their work office. It's almost seamless. You get a little bit of that shadow around them, but people are learning how to use this technology to make, again, that experience that much better and that much more acceptable to both their internal teams and to their customers.
Let me ask you this question, Lakeisha, and actually I want to ask all of you this exact same question because I think it's something that we're all curious about. There's no right answer, but what would you guess is a practice that we have historically employed or something that we've always done that's probably gone for good? Is there anything that comes to mind that you think is going to go away as a result of this crisis? And I may have surprised you a little bit with that one. I apologize. But if anybody else wants to chime in, and maybe we don't know, maybe it's a matter of time before we know what's going to change, and you know, if we're ever going to get back to normal, and a lot of it depends on that. But I'm curious if any of you have any gut feelings as to what you think might be gone for good.
What will go away in this space? I guess the reason I make that big pause and look on my face is because this is the construction industry. We held on to the fax machine longer than any other industry in the world. So we're not one to part ways with something we've connected to. I do love that we have these. I mean, I've been using these tools for a very long time, but I'm also what they refer to as a change agent. So I'm the person that's trying to drive change as fast as possible. And I hope that we don't lose these connections where we as organizations or leaders come together and share ideas. I have had a weekly call with a group of CEOs ever since this started, and just various groups, whether it's groups that represent the science and building industry or just association professionals or with my leadership. And I think what's so important and what we should never lose are those connections, those times where we share. We've all been so busy and on the road and running around that we never have time to stop and talk to each other. And now that we're trapped in our houses, we make that time. And I hope when we all start, you know, whatever, they find a cure, we all move forward, but we should not stop sharing ideas because we are all greater for it. And I hope that remains. But the one thing that I look forward to the use of paper. There's so much use of paper that going away. Everything electronic filing, no more paper files. That's my dream. My accounting team is working hard on that right now. But the rest of my company, paper files are no more. Just digital only. So to me, I would hope that paper goes away.
I've moved my screen around. Either of the Reeds, do either of you have any thoughts or input on that? And whichever speaks.
You know, Scott, I think there's a natural evolution of time, and that a lot of these things will change organically as the industry responds and adapts to what's current and what they have to do. I do think that the construction industry, because it is as old as mankind is, we can fall into a mode of traditionalism. But I don't know that traditionalism ever actually existed in the construction industry. It has advanced throughout time and history and will continue to do so with or without pandemics. And this is not the first pandemic the country's gone through. This may be the first pandemic this generation of Americans have gone through. But the construction industry has lived through every one throughout time, and it will continue to adapt as it always has. And I can't say what's going to disappear and what's going to continue to stay. Instead, I think that things will phase in and phase out based on their effectiveness. And things we learn today will be applied tomorrow, and we'll learn to see where the efficiencies and benefits are. But I will say this, Scott, you and I met 3 years ago up in Wisconsin. We've become friends since then, and I know on a personal level, I miss the times that we can share a glass of wine or a meal together like we did in Scotland. And I'm looking forward to having those moments come back. And I think a lot of our members are as well.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. That's, you know, and I do think that there will be aspects of what we're learning during this time that we will take forward and we'll combine them with the practices that we've already learned. I can see future IBEC conventions containing a virtual piece where we'll still have the majority of us face to face, but give opportunities for others to participate remotely. So I do think there's a lot of takeaways from what we're going through right now. We just have to keep our heads screwed on straight and make sure that we're sane when we come out on the other side of it. let me do this now. We've got, I think we may have some questions. I'm actually struggling a little bit to see any questions that may have been submitted. So what I want to do is ask the eye in the sky behind us if they could either email those questions to me or text them to me, and then I can ask the panelists. We'll go ahead. I'll wait for those to come to me. I have a few other questions that I can ask you in the meantime while we're waiting on that. But I'd like to get a feel for, and again, nobody knows the answer, but what does your gut tell you the next year to 18 months are going to look like? And Reed Hitchcock, you've probably got a lot of feelers out there and get a lot of input from your members as to where they see the industry going in the future. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
You know, it's a tough question. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on it. It's you know, there's so many variables right now and so many things we don't know. There's question marks around the economy. There's question marks about a resurgence of the virus. What our members are saying is that they're cautiously optimistic right now. Things are improving. March, April were very slow. May was a terrific month. For roofing across the board, commercial and residential. Right now, you know, people are, you know, there's storms. People that need roofs need roofs. That's one of the beautiful things about the roofing business is it is essential. A roof is something we all want and need to have. There is concern about the fall, particularly maybe later third quarter, fourth quarter, and into the first quarter next year, just depending on what happens with the virus, what happens with the economy. My members are approaching it very conservatively, both in the reopening of their businesses and bringing people back in, both in the office and in the plants, and projecting down the road. We're as an organization taking a very conservative approach to our spending right now because we don't want to rush into big meeting contracts and frivolous travel. I mean, that's one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about what's going to change. I think a lot of people in construction, I love to travel. I do it a lot. A lot of the people in our teams do, but we're learning that there are some of these things that are okay to do remotely. So it's a caution. There is optimism, but it's reserved optimism, and I think that the next couple months are going to be very telling about what the next 12 months are going to look like.
Reed and Lakeisha, you have kind of the same sentiment or a different take on it, or anything you want to add?
I would just say that I'm a bit more of a pessimist on where the economy is going to end up. This is really a global event, and that means global consumption has got to fall off. And we're just now starting to see some of the impacts in South America and Africa. And those consumers also drive manufacturing and economic activity here in the United States. The Congress has done what they could. However, they've spent about, with the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing, now about $6.5 trillion. There's an expense to that. And so I'm horrible at predicting what's going to happen, but the arithmetic to me doesn't add up. And so at some point here, there's going to be what I believe will be a pretty dramatic and significant global slowdown, and that we're going to feel that. And for the good, on the positive side, we're in the roofing business and everybody needs a roof. And so that will ultimately help us weather it, whereas some other industries may not.
And I think that I think the big changes, of course, are going to come on the future of design, what people are expecting, what they're trying to do in the commercial business environment, what changes need to be made. But from a budgeting perspective, for our association members that are, they're going to have they're all planning for a hit, right? Whether you've had to either cancel your annual meeting or change it to virtual. Those who rely heavily on those dollars those who rely heavily on dues dollars. When companies are having to make cuts, they cut professional development, they cut travel, and they cut membership. And so the associations that we represent will come into challenges. And then also the people that we're trying to stay connected to. Will they want to, we're a 501c3, so, but our goal is we still have to keep the lights on in order to do the research and the work and the convening that we do. So we still need people to make donations and to join the membership and to be connected with us. And you have to be a realist when you look at those numbers as you move forward. I've already told my team when they're preparing the budget for FY21 that we're going to have 2 different budgets for events and any other kind of pieces that are really out of our control. So we have to be prepared for that. And just again, connecting your committee members, there's things we can do virtually, and that's great. But we do need to be prepared for those cuts that people have made. And again, the industry itself, when you're representing the housing industry, we have what, 30 million, 40 million people who've lost their job. Well, then they're clearly not going to be making changes or switching homes or buying up. So there's all those elements that you have to be aware of. And if they're not buying a new home and then they're not spending more, then that means they're not manufacturing as many products. It's all a ripple effect. So having been in the housing industry in the middle of the great housing downturn, I am just going to be cautiously optimistic as well and hope, but also I always say prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. That's what I do.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I have received a couple of questions here, and I've got to be able to try to pull them up. But let's see if I can ask this. Okay, here's a question I think is worth asking. And Reed Ribble, this may be more in your wheelhouse. So the question is, new work in our industry comes from companies, in the public sector releasing projects and funding them. We have seen a moratorium on spending from the private sector. How can our industry encourage a safe and logical change and encourage our clients to move forward with spending?
Well, it's going to be dependent on who the client is. Now, they mentioned the separation between institutional roofing, which would include government buildings, schools, universities, and hospitals. We've actually seen that fairly robust, and the industry is aggressively lobbying Congress that any infrastructure bill that it include vertical construction, so that it's not just roads and bridges and seaports, but it's also the buildings, the schools, the universities that need the help, and that will help, and the entire industry's voice needs to be heard on that. Trying to convince commercial building owners to spend money, they're going to be as cautious. I agreed with virtually everything Lakeisha just said in regard to it. There's going to be a cautionary movement by corporations that they're going to hold on to cash until they figure out what's actually going to happen. And there is this cascade that occurs. If restaurants are failing, if retail spaces are failing, they no longer pay rent, so landlords can't pay mortgages, and this cascades to our customer. And so there's a potential effect there. And because we should be fortunate here anyway, that this is an election year, because both parties are going to want to have some ability to campaign on the fact that it was their efforts that caused any type of upturn or resurgence of consumer spending. But 70% of our economy is driven by people willing to give up the money that they currently have. And they're not going to do that if they don't think it will be replaced next week with a paycheck. And so I wish I had a better answer for the questioner. It's going to be very difficult to get commercial buyers to spend that money absent some weather event that is pushing them to it. And that's kind of my take on it.
Scott?
We can't hear you, Scott.
We can't hear you, Scott.
There, that's good for everybody, but in that instance, it didn't help any of us. So I apologize. So the next question is, how can the design community and the contractor community better collaborate on consultant construction phase site visit protocols related to interactions on job sites with the contractor's employees, safely gaining access to the roof, communicating observations, etc. And I want to expand on that just a little bit, and it's going to turn into like a really big question, but we were contacted by some of our members asking about what would be their liability. They may be in one of the demographics that would be more susceptible to or more vulnerable should they contract the virus. And what are their liabilities if they're the designer of record and they're unable to provide the site visits necessary to ensure compliance with their designs? What liabilities have they absorbed by virtue of not being able to participate in some of these visits that they would otherwise provide? So that is a long, complicated question, and there may not be a right answer, but I would be curious, and anyone willing to offer their thoughts on that, please speak up.
You know, the difficulty that the designers are going to have if the end user won't allow them to have access, it's going to put a more onus on them to really pre-qualify contractors, to work with contractors that they've got relationships with, that they trust, that will deliver the quality assured product that they're looking to deliver to their customer. And so the relationships that they've built over the years with the best contractors in the country will end up paying dividends at the end of the day. But you could make the argument that nobody, unless it's an emergency, should be working on a nursing home right now, just because the risk going both directions is bad and the liability loop is always there. I'm not a lawyer, and I wish NRCA's general counsel could weigh in on the liability stuff. But for me, the fastest way to mitigate liability is to be thoughtful and pragmatic and communicating right from the start with the end user of that building.
Well, I think it's also important to use the technology tools that are out there to help in this situation, where if there is someone who is a vulnerable person and they can partner with someone else who's on site to utilize tools like a FaceTime where they can walk through digitally through the space. And it may not be something that you're necessarily comfortable with, but I know people who've literally purchased homes sight unseen in person because of technology, where they were able to walk through a space utilizing digital tools. And when they went to finally get to the home that they had already purchased, it looked exactly as what they saw through technology. So this is when people should take advantage of those technology tools that exist.
And I just want to echo, I think you're spot on. Yesterday, my wife and I remotely managed from Virginia to Connecticut a garage door assessment and replacement for my mother-in-law using FaceTime. We diagnosed the issue, we developed a solution, and we solved the problem. That's what these tools facilitate. And to Reed's point, there are, including NRCA's own and those managed by my members for the roofing industry, some tremendous training programs. Go with the trained professionals if they're available for the various products going into your building. This is the time when I think, and we've talked about in the roofing industry, where you're going to see a separation between somebody that can hang a shingle out and somebody that knows what they're doing.
And Scott, I would also tell your members that they can begin to design specifically to certified workforces now by calling for an NRCA Pro certified worker to be on that roof. And that's a worker that has actually been tested for competency by a third party. And then they can know that the person that's up on the roof that's delivering that work actually has demonstrated the competency to do that work. And they can begin calling for that now in a lot of disciplines, and certainly in thermoplastic and in EPDM roofing, those people are available today. Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, I've got two more questions here that I want to ask, and one of them I'm sad I even have to ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Let me find it here. it says this disease has also become confrontational and political in the workplace. If you wear a mask, it politicizes the workplace, whether or not you wear your mask. Speaking of the office, it's expected that field people wear PPE and take extreme precautions, but if I wear a mask, I can be made fun of. That's something that I've seen. I wear a mask when I go out in public, and sometimes I get funny looks from people. But I'm trying not to let it bother me. It doesn't bother me too much, and sometimes that's a decision. But curious, anybody want to add anything to that?
I'll comment on it. Speaking on behalf of our members, both in the offices and in the plants, what I'm hearing is a zero tolerance policy for not adhering. In a lot of jurisdictions, there are penalties that law enforcement can levy. There are mechanisms for employees to whistleblow on these things not happening, and our companies are concerned. We have had outbreaks in manufacturing facilities. We certainly don't want to have more of them if we can avoid them. So the communication is that this is not an option, either in the facility or in the office. This is what it takes to work.
I 100% agree with you, Reed. It is so important also for company leaders to do just that, lead. You have to recognize that if you're saying safety is the #1 priority, then you need to enforce and make sure that the culture of your environment is that it is supportive and thinking outside of yourself and about your fellow coworkers. So right now, every state still has a law that says you're supposed to be wearing your mask. Companies need to enforce those rules and those policies, and they need to express that in a way that lets people know that it is against company culture or against company policy to not follow those rules and to enforce them. Because if not, you're going to run into much more long-term issues.
And the last question that I have, it says the unprecedented shutdown of people-to-people interactions and the United States economy during the COVID-19 pandemic has been extremely disruptive. What do you see as the future effects when the next flu bug or virus comes around? Have we learned? Are we prepared for it?
You know,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Reed. Hitchcock.
I was just going to say I don't know that we're prepared, but we're a little more educated than we were at the beginning of this. So we have a basic idea of some of the fundamentals of mitigating spread of something like this. We've also learned, to Lakeisha's earlier points, we've learned that technology can facilitate a lot of what we do. But I think we've also learned that there are some very vulnerable parts of our industry and our economy. And I think we've still got some learning to do about how to take care of those sectors and those people.
You know, I think there was a political element to this, and there's a health element to it, and politics and health collided. And so it goes back to an age-old debate that has gone on, and this is a global debate: health versus wealth, as opposed to health and wealth. And I would hope that policymakers, and I would hope that the American people have discovered that it is often not an either or, nor should it be an either or, but it should be a both and. And I believe that the next pandemic will be treated much differently than this one, and that lessons that were learned here will be applied in the future. And most importantly, the American people will demonstrate how adaptive they are, and will adapt very quickly. I think in the next time through, much more quickly than the politicians will.
Okay, well, listen, we're finished with the questions. We're almost done here. I want to give each of you a minute or two. I want to finish on a high note, okay? So I would like to ask each of you to give us, your members, our members, those who are listening here today, your best piece of encouragement or wisdom that they can take forward after this event. And we'll go back in the same order that we started with. So Reed Hitchcock, I'll start with you.
I think the message is that for my members and for the community, the roofing industry is resilient. Roofs are essential. We provide not only a necessity of life, but it can be done in a safe environment. Like I said, we're cautious, but maybe a little more cautious than optimistic right now. But looking down the road, we see opportunities. We see opportunities for improving our workflows and our systems, our processes, for taking advantage of tools to better the industry and to learn from what's happened over the last 3 months and carry that forward. We've got opportunities to put tax credits on the table for both commercial buildings and for residential construction, remodels, things like that. So I think people need to look at it optimistically, and we'll adapt as we have to. But the future, whether it's next month, next week, next year, or 5 years from now, the future looks good.
Thank you. Reed?
Yeah, I would say this. I think there's a remarkable resiliency in the roofing industry. There's a remarkable resiliency in the American people. They've always been willing to put their shoulder to the work that's necessary to make a better future for themselves and for the families. And we're seeing that today. I think the one really great thing that's happened out of all of this is that the industry, while we all have parochial interests, contractors have maybe a different interest than manufacturers and designers and consultants. They've been able to put those parochial interests aside and say, how do we move this entire industry forward? And they're communicating at a level and in a way that is really uncommon. And I think it's here to stay. I think the benefits that have come through that additional level of communication and the unity that has happened in the roofing industry has been really dramatic, and it's been something special to watch. And let's face it, from the beginning of time, humans have sought shelter, and they will seek shelter forever. And we're the ones that provide it. And so I take a great amount of encouragement on what the future will be, in spite of all the negative things I've said and cautions I've put out there today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Lakeisha, bring us home.
Absolutely. I am so excited about the future for this industry. I would be remiss to not talk about workforce. With all the people who are unemployed that have lost their jobs, this is an industry that is ripe for advancement, for growth, for bringing more people in and showing them the pride that is in this industry and is so often not necessarily shared or expressed. This is the time to let people know the amazing work that we do, to show them the fact that the places where we live and work are safer and more secure because of the hard work of the people that are on this call, that are part of this industry. There is such ability to grow, and there's so much opportunity by utilizing technology that for years our industry maybe wasn't excited about embracing, but this unfortunate circumstance has brought us to an opportunity to open our eyes and see what's next and see how we can continue to advance and lead the industry. I am thrilled to be a part of it. I continue to love the passion of all the people that I've worked with, and I know that we are going to do amazing things together.
Well, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the three of you taking the time to spend a little bit this afternoon with us. Your insights have been extremely valuable to our members, and I hate that we're not doing this in person, but I remain confident that we'll be able to do it soon. And I wish all of you all the best, and I can't wait to see you again.
And to you, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so for everybody else, thanks so much for joining us. We've got another block of educational sessions this afternoon. It starts at 1:45 Central, 2:45 Eastern, and just your other time zones. And then tomorrow at 1 Central, we have our final live session. That's called The Weakest Link, How Can It Be Stronger? 20 years of hurricane investigations. And that session will be led by Bas Baskarin and David Rudbitz. Again, I want to thank everybody for being with us today. Everyone stay safe, stay sane, stay healthy, and I can't wait to see you again soon. In the meantime, take care.
Take care.
Thank you.